something we've been looking for a long time. We've had snow and rain for the last 6 months here, so it's good to see things warming up and drying up. And that's what happens when you have climate change, Mr. Ritz.
Say that with a straight face.
Anyway, we have been honored to have some people to video conference from Mexico. Welcome, folks. My son-in-law is from Querétaro. So I go to Mexico. So I go there many times. Folks, as you know, we are doing our study. Our committee is a very busy committee. We've finished a European trade agreement. We've also did a major study on TPP, which of course Mexico was involved with. And right now, of course, our study is very focused on our future trade with Mexico and the United States. Of course, it's on the minds of many right now, not only between our three countries, but the rest of the world is watching us. Our committee has already did some extensive travel in western United States. We've had many stakeholders, from Canadian stakeholders that do a lot of business with the United States and Mexico coming in front of us. And today we're going to, we're very appreciative that we have some people from Mexico to speak to us. Sometimes video conferencing cannot be always consistent, so I think what we're going to do is start off right off the bat with our folks from Mexico, so we can get their comments in. And gentlemen, what we'll usually do is have around 5 minutes. It would be appreciative. And then we will go with dialogue with the MPs. I'm assuming that you would also have translation. If we have translation? They have English. You have English translation? Okay, well, without further ado, we're going to start off and we're going to go right to Mexico. And we have Mr. Ortega from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce for Mexico. Welcome, sir, and you have the floor. Go ahead.
Very kind, sir, and we are very honored to be able to talk to you and to state the position of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce here in Mexico. Our membership is comprised of around 300 Canadian companies that have ventured to invest in this country, that do trade actively, and that are very much concerned and interested in ensuring that NAFTA is defended, as we put it in an open letter to President Peña on 17 January this year, sir. We stated that the Chamber considers NAFTA to be the main international trading asset of the three countries, and certainly of Canada and Mexico, in our view. And we also stated in that open letter, and just anecdotically, I have here this open letter that was published in one of the main newspapers, national newspapers. We also said that after so many years of being in full force, the agreement certainly is fit to be modernized, and we consider that TPP is a very good reference for that exercise. It's an exercise that has already been done, where Canada and Mexico have been a part of. And we also said that that modernization should always be directed towards increasing the competitivity of North America, of the North American region, which is something that NAFTA achieved in the many years of being in force. So to ensure that we have an increasing value within all the trading chains and all the investment chain. The last thing that we said is that Canada, and this is a message for Mexico, Canada is a reliable partner, and our position is that this should be a trilateral negotiation, since NAFTA is a trilateral deal. And Canada, as it happened during the negotiations many years ago, anecdotically, I was a negotiator in those days, Canada and Mexico, if they join forces, could do a good job in ensuring that it gets modernized. And finally, just reading the letter that was sent by the USTR representative, Mr. Lighthizer, to the Senate, we are happy to read that Mr. Lighthizer is explicitly mentioning the concept of modernizing NAFTA. So we wholly subscribe that objective. And this modernization, I think, is on our agenda. In particular, it is on the agenda of the Mexican government. So we very much support that approach. Again, we consider that the TPP will be the main reference. Finally, whatever happened with that negotiation, this is also a position that we have stated publicly and in other forms to our representatives in Canada and Mexico. We consider that Mexico and Canada should reinforce their bilateral relationship within NAFTA, under the aegis of NAFTA, or elsewhere. And there are many avenues to achieve that. And certainly, whatever happens to NAFTA and to that negotiation, they should push for a successful TPP negotiation if they are the 11 countries that are left, if they are able to launch it without one of the members that quit. So the position of the chamber is that such an option should be explored, and I think it would be worth to do it. So that is what I have to say, sir.
Much, and we're going to move over to the Mexican Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Gomez, go ahead, sir. You got the floor. Oh, just one sec. One sec. Oh, just can you hold 1 sec? Just we can't hear you. Just 1 minute. One moment.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you go.
Good.
Go ahead, Mr. Gomez. You got the floor.
So I was just thanking you. I was thanking the committee. It's a pleasure and an honor to be a part of these hearings, and it's certainly extremely timely. I know that you didn't plan it like that, but of course today is the official notification on behalf of the USTR vis-a-vis Congress and the negotiations that are happening. If you'll allow me, I'm going to go back a little bit. I don't think it's highlighted enough that the only reason we're living through this period of bewildered uncertainty is because our collective generation in North America was tested in the run-up to the American elections, and we were found lacking. In the case of Mexico, this is perhaps more patently obvious, right? The current president of the United States based his campaign on ignorance and xenophobia vis-a-vis Mexico and Mexicans. As you know, he led the Republican field only after calling Mexicans rapists. He consolidated his base around the rallying cry, build the wall, and then he became a serious candidate in the eyes of many when the Canadian, American, and Mexican private sectors, as well as the Democratic candidate herself, responded with a deafening silence to his attacks on NAFTA. Right? So suddenly he was perceived as being right on a very important policy issue. And the die was cast, and now we are suffering the consequences of our negligence, to be perfectly frank. So whenever I speak to a Canadian audience, and I think this is very important, there are a few things that need to be highlighted, because our relationship is not known. Our relationship with the United States is not as well known in Canada as it might be. The first is that Mexico and the United States are the two most integrated large countries in the world. We have the most legally crossed border in the world, with 350 million border crossings through 330 entry points. Mexico has the equivalent of the population of Canada and the United States, with 36.9 million Mexicans and Mexican Americans. 80% of those are either U.S. citizens or legal residents. That is, the Mexican experience is not an undocumented experience. And at the same time, Mexico is by far the most important destination for the U.S. diaspora. At any given time, there are between 1 and 3 million Americans in Mexico, which is between 4 and 12 times more than Canada. Official Washington is very well aware of the staggering depth of our relationship, which is the reason why Mexico City is the only place outside of Washington, D.C. that every U.S. government agency is represented. It's the reason why the new U.S. Embassy here in Mexico City is a billion-dollar project, or at least as what it was, because as is so often the case with this administration, nobody really knows anymore what's going on. At the same time, Mexico maintains the largest consular presence of any country anywhere in the United States. When I had I'll try to give a focus to this. Basically, when I had the opportunity to introduce the governor of Texas here in Mexico City, he talked about us being neighbors, which led to my very politely correcting him, we're not really neighbors, we're roommates. And the bottom line is that just like Canada, just like with respect to Canada, American prosperity and national security directly depend on a cooperative and stable Mexico. So what is the Mexican perspective on what's going on in North America in general? There's certainly an element of anger at the insults, as well as significant bemusement at the lies. But mainly we don't have a clue as to what's going to happen with American policy. With one day NAFTA being on the verge of cancellation, another day NAFTA being saved because the U.S. president apparently likes his Canadian and Mexican counterparts, which I don't know how viable that is in the medium and long term as a reason to stay in NAFTA, the fact that it gets along with Prime Minister Trudeau and President Peña Nieto. And then we hear that the U.S. will seek separate arrangements with Mexico and Canada, which, if you actually know anything about our position, is a non-starter, at least with Mexico. And I think the same is with Canada at this point. I know it didn't start like that, but that's at least our feeling, and we'd be very interested to find out your views on that. But if the White House chief strategist Steve Bannon's whiteboard is to be believed, the U.S. will do its best to quarantine the rest of the world from this, from his city on a hill, sunsetting American visa laws and all of that. And Canadians are being told by the president of Goldman Sachs to relax because the president of the United States apparently likes them. And I guess that corollary being that Mexicans should be sweating because he doesn't like us. I mean, we don't know how to interpret those things. In his interview with The Economist, the president says that the problem with NAFTA is our VAT, right, our value-added tax, our IVA, which at least is something that the Mexican consumer can get behind, although I don't think that he really knew very much what he was talking about. And the truth is that nobody knows. We're having to deal with the United States that sounds more like a volatile developing country than the world's largest and most sophisticated market, sort of Venezuelization of the United States. But at the same time, nothing happens, right, until today, of course. The peso drops, so the peso has dropped significantly. We are about 20% below where we should be because of these tweets and because of these lies and because of everything that's been said. And of course, American exporters are hurt and everybody's worse off in a climate of insecurity and fear. So this brings me to Canada. Our perception of Canada is that after the unfortunate episode of Ambassador McNaughton's comments in Washington that fed the whole throwing Mexico under a bus narrative, Canada has come to realize what was obvious to us from the beginning. That is that something that I've had a chance to share on CBC's Power and Politics, and I know that it caused a little bit of an uproar, which is the fact that it was just a matter of time that Canada was going to be put in the crosshairs. It's the reality. It would be really foolish to think that it is in anyone's interest to negotiate individually with this administration. I'm very well aware of the fact that the Canadian business community is very interested in flying under the radar, and that I'm sure that you're being pressured to be accommodating. But with respect to this, I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's about acting on principle, and that's what I would share with you in this first round.
Well, thank you, sir, and thank you for your concise and frank description about where we're at right now. And I just, before I move on to our next witness, I'd just like to say that our committee is very focused on our relationship with Mexico. It's very important. We had conversations when we were doing the TPP, but also just to let you know, both of you, that our committee is planning on going to Mexico. It's in the final stage, so we're hoping to go down there this fall, if everything works well, and if we do, we hope to meet you both there when we go down. So just to let you know, we're very close and we're still friends, and we want to work on the futures. But I'm going to move on now to Mr.
Excellent news. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Dade, you're from the Canada West Foundation.
You want to go to Colin next, or to me?
Oh, I have a third one. Oh, from Mexico. Sorry about that. Mr. Robertson. Go ahead, sir. I didn't recognize you down the bottom there. Sorry about that. Go ahead. So you're coming from Montreal?
I am.
Okay, thank you. So go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair. My remarks will cover the upcoming trade negotiation, the Canada-Mexico relationship, and the need for middle powers like Canada and Mexico to stand up in support of the rules-based liberal international system. On the North American Accord, we need a new North American Accord. The NAFTA worked to the benefit of all three parties, Canada, USA, and Mexico, but it is time to bring the NAFTA, negotiated before the digital age and the arrival of e-commerce, into the 21st century. The Trans-Pacific Partnership would have largely accomplished this, but the Trump administration has withdrawn from this Obama administration initiative. So we need to adjust to the current circumstances. A new agreement would include and set the standards in emerging areas like e-commerce and the growing digital trade. We can also make improvements and integrate into the agreement standards on labor and the environment. We need to address labor mobility, including the mutual recognition of accreditation. Then we can make maximum use of the talent pool that North America enjoys, but that we need to harness to make us the most competitive region in the world. This means provision for trade adjustment so that those who are displaced by trade decisions or efficiency improvements in automation, robotics, and artificial intelligence are guaranteed the opportunity to improve their skills or have training in another area. In doing so, we have the opportunity to create, just as the NAFTA did in its time, the new model for trade agreements, a realistic but progressive trade agreement that gives a helping hand to those who are displaced or lose out. A trilateral trade negotiation leading to a new North American Economic Accord would respect the sovereignties of the three nations. It would be a very different model from that of the European Union with its centralized and heavy bureaucratic oversight. Rather, we would continue with the current approach of ad hoc working groups to ensure and evergreen the agreement that allows for continuous improvement in areas like transportation. In the coming weeks, we will hear a lot of noise and nonsense about Canada and Mexico out of Washington. We need to distinguish between what is real and what is theater. As the great Gretzky put it, go where the puck is going and keep our eyes on the net and the goals that we want and can score. On Canada-Mexico, NAFTA transformed the Canada-Mexico relationship, one of the cordial distance based on a shared neighbor, into that of family. Today, there is an annual increasing flow of 2 million Canadians to Mexico, especially during the winter months. Canadian investment, mining, manufacturing, banking has increased many-fold, while trade has more than tripled, even faster than with our traditional partners in Europe and Japan. Today, Mexico is our third largest trading partner. But it's not reciprocal. Mexican investment in Canada never took. There is one notable exception, Grupo Bimbo's acquisition of Canada Bread in 2014 that now operates 17 bakeries employing over 4,000 across Canada. The imposition of the visa in 2009 more than halved Mexican travel to Canada, effectively chilling tourism, study, and investment. The lifting of the visa this year and its replacement with the Electronic Travel Authority has resulted in a significant increase in Mexican travel to Canada. We are already reaping the rewards in more tourists, but we should be doing more in terms of tourism promotion. We expect more students, especially given President Trump's comments about building a wall on the Mexican border. Here we should encourage recruitment visits by middle and high schools, university and vocational schools, and provincial education ministers. Beyond students, we could do a lot more in joint research projects in manufacturing and agri-food. In the longer term, ease of entry into Canada would also generate more investment, but we need to target Mexican investment that matches in Canada. Most promising are the automotive and automotive parts sector and the energy and energy services sector. Goldman Sachs estimates that by 2050, Mexico will overtake China in terms of per capita GDP. There is already a middle class of 40 million in Mexico. Mexico is our springboard into the potential of the Americas. We already have preferred observer status in the Pacific Alliance that includes Mexico, Peru, Colombia, and Chile. In the short term, before the end of the year, Prime Minister Trudeau should lead a Team Canada mission with premiers, business, and university presidents to Mexico to deepen Canada-Mexico relations and to underline our solidarity with Mexico in negotiating a new North American Accord. The picture of solidarity, Mr. Trudeau with President Peña Nieto in Mexico City, would be appreciated in Mexico. Its significance would also be recognized in the United States, and it would give encouragement to our many allies in the Congress, the states, the business community, and even within the Trump administration. A vigorous partnership with Mexico is already working to our mutual benefit, but we still have to realize the full potential of the Canada-Mexico relationship. Word about middle powers. We live in a world of disarray. The rules-based liberal international system and supporting architecture that Canadians helped engineer in the period after the Second World War has kept the peace and created the conditions for extraordinary growth and prosperity. Today it is under strain and in need of reform and rejuvenation, and the middle powers need to step up. China and Russia would like to see a return to spheres of influence and a concert of great powers. This would not serve Canadian or Mexican interests. The United States, which guaranteed the system and built it on its military might, wants more burden sharing by like-minded. This we must do because the hard truth is that the U.S. carries and sustains the system under which Canadians and Mexicans have thrived. We need to stand up with like-minded middle powers like Mexico and reaffirm our support and commitment to the rules-based liberal international system. A new, progressive approach to sustainable trade and labor mobility in partnership with Mexico and other democratic middle powers is the place to begin the necessary reform and rejuvenation. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you, Mr. Robertson. And we're going to move on now to the Canada West Foundation, and we have Mr. Dade. Thank you for joining us here today, sir, and you're the wrap-up guy. Go ahead.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a great honor to follow the colleagues like Augustine, who I've known for a long time, and others. First and foremost, I would like to thank the committee for the invitation to share a few points of view, perspectives from Canada West Foundation, and the long-term work we need to do.
Greetings from our CEO, who your former colleague, and I think who's worked with many of you here before, Martha Hall Findlay. So you'll notice that my presentation is much different than in the past, more formal. She's given me strict instructions to clean up my act when I come back to Parliament. So given that we have a new CEO, you'll see a new change with Canada West. So I had the committee to myself this morning with Foreign Affairs. So I'll cut my much more detailed testimony to something a bit more brief in light of the news that nous venons de voir de Washington cet après-midi.
We just had news from Washington this afternoon.
Congress, by the administration, of a written submission on goals by the administration for negotiation of NAFTA, we have entered what could be called the TPA phase of negotiations. We are leaving the phase or the period of the sole formation of U.S. trade policy being done by tweet at 2 a.m. in the morning by Donald Trump. We are now in the era where Congress is exercising control over U.S. trade policy. This does not mean that Trump's influence and the influence of the administration will be completely negated, but it means that we now have balance. Trade under the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution, the Commerce Clause. Congress has responsibility for the regulation of trade between the United States and foreign states, among the states, and with the Indian nations. It is clear that trade is a congressional area of responsibility. The negotiation of agreements is the responsibility of the administration. But the rules on trade, the laws on trade, the rules and laws on tariffs, anything the administration negotiates has to be approved by Congress. We are now entering the era where Congress will start exercising control. And I would refer not to 20 years of U.S. history in trade negotiations, but I would go back a month and a half, 2 months. March 21st, Secretary Ross, Acting U.S. Trade Representative Vaughn go to the Senate Finance Committee to talk about their plans for trade and for renegotiating NAFTA. Secretary Ross, if you read Politico and other sources in Washington, attempts to slip in a notification that they'd like to begin renegotiating NAFTA. The response from Ron Wyden, the ranking Democrat, and the rest of the committee was practically to laugh him out of the room. This is not proper notification. You have to give a written summation of how the negotiating positions of the administration align with the priorities established by the TPA legislation. The administration then has to listen to input from Congress and not just respond, but incorporate changes from Congress, the Senate, Finance Committee, and House Ways and Means into what the administration's proposing, and then has to demonstrate how they'll be going forward. That was not done. The next attempt by the administration was to suggest that Vaughn, the acting USTR, could do this. Again, sent back out of committee saying, no, it has to be a USTR. So the recent evidence, the facts and evidence before us, by Congress strengthening its role. It has never ceded authority to the administration for trade policy. It's delegated. And we're seeing a Congress that, in evidence, is exercising more influence. So I think we really have to take heed of the role that Congress is playing and will likely continue to play if recent evidence, not 20 years, but the past couple months, and even the evidence today, the questions they put forward to the new USTR are in the indication. There are strict calls in the TPA legislation for updating Congress, for Congress having access to the negotiating documents from the United States and from its counterparts in the negotiations, and there's every indication that Congress is going to hold the administration to this. So we're arriving at, I think, a period of balance. Having to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and worry about what Trump tweeted is going to be a little less important in light of the role that I expect Congress to play. So what does this mean for us and for Canada? There are a couple things here. One, finance, ways and means. These are the areas of focus for us in Washington. You're going to Washington? That's who you need to spend time with, I would humbly suggest. Focus laser-like on the members of the committee, get to know them, and be able to work with them on the negotiations. Work with our Mexican counterparts in doing the same thing, in targeting members of the committee. Lloyd Doggett from Texas would be amenable to talking to the Mexicans, I'm quite sure, given the importance of trade with Mexico for his district. So there are strategies that come not just for the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, or sorry, I still refer to them that way, but there's a role for Parliament to play in this too. Second, the other opportunity for us, getting to people to whom congressmen listen. When there's a crisis in Washington or when there are issues concerning NAFTA, U.S. congressmen may or may not answer a call from the Canadian ambassador, but they're sure as hell going to answer a call from the Speaker of the State House back home, the governor back home, the president of the local chamber of commerce, and those ties, we have unique ability to interact and influence those people from ongoing relations at the subnational level. Our premiers, speakers of legislatures in Canada the provincial legislatures are in Washington. We are a member of the U.S. Council of State Governments. We are a member of PENWARE. We are a member of the Great Lakes Government Council. We're a member of the New England Governors Association. So we need to pursue these, and it's something we haven't done in the past. Part of the problem is it's an open secret that the clerk of the Privy Council has told the premiers the provinces need to do more in terms of reaching out in the states, to exercise their influence, to reach out. Yet we're asking the premiers and the provinces to do more when you've seen the Saskatchewan budget. You've seen the budget in Manitoba, in Alberta, even in BC. We're asking the provinces to do more at a time when we need them to do more, but they have less. So we have been working with Western Diversification, trying to get them to create a fund to co-finance subnational engagement activities with the provinces, to double what we're doing in the states, to take advantage of this unique window to exercise influence. Finally, on the other area, the other point I'd like to make is North America is not NAFTA. We often conflate NAFTA with North American integration. So even in testimony here and in Foreign Affairs, people talk about the Regulatory Cooperation Council, and they confuse that as being part of NAFTA. But we have continued success on integration with the RCC, with our Trusted Travelers programs. At a time when we're talking about ripping up NAFTA, there's work underway to combine the Canada-U.S. Regulatory Cooperation Council and the U.S.-Mexican Regulatory Cooperation Council. At a time when we're talking about building walls in North America, we're still working to link our two separate Trusted Traveler programs into one North American Trusted Traveler program. No, these do not offset the potential of a redone NAFTA or NAFTA being ripped up, but it is an important note that there are other avenues to advance our economic interest in terms of integration in North America, strengthening the Regulatory Cooperation Council, or, as we did a presentation to the U.S. Parliamentary Working Group, look at things like creating a North American Infrastructure Bank. It's the type of small-scale, focused initiative that will help the Americans solve a problem they have with border infrastructure, and that can really benefit Canada and give us a leg up on dealing with the Americans. So I'll close with those notes. There are things that we can do. It's an important day today, and we need to be prepared for an era of more balance, and we can finally sleep through the night and not worry about that 2 a.m. tweet coming from Donald Trump as much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Dayton. You're right. The timing couldn't have been better for today and for the witnesses coming and giving us a little wind in our sail to forge on and bridge our relationships. But we're going to now move on to dialogue with the MPs, and we have the Conservatives up first for 5 minutes, and we have Mr. Hoback. Go ahead, sir. You got the floor.
Well, thank you, Chair, and Carlo and my other colleagues. Thank you. Carlo, thank you for this. I've been working on this in the background myself, just like you have, and you've just confirmed the data that I've seen when we start looking at timelines and how realistic we can have things done in an appropriate time based on the elections coming up in both Mexico and the midterms in the U.S. So I think that actually throws a lot of reality into what can happen in the next short term and medium term and long term. So good job on that. I want to talk with my friend from Mexico, Augustine. We've actually met before. I was in Mexico, and we actually were in a session together, if you remember or not. And we were talking about Canada and Mexico and how we needed to move forward with our trade agendas. And if the U.S. wasn't going to participate, we'd do it ourselves. And I think that's actually something that I wanted to ask you about is in regards to you're looking at agriculture products, and you were talking about corn in Mexico and how you source a lot of that out of the U.S., and you're looking at alternative markets. We've got great barley up here in Canada that I think you'd really enjoy, plus corn too, so just put that out there. But in the Mexican political spectrum, how do you see these negotiations unfolding, and how do they work into your timelines in relationship to the fact you've got election coming up in the fall, or basic midterms, primaries in the fall? You got a midterm this June, I think, in Mexico City. How is this all going to play out? Mexico State, sorry. Yeah. How will this all play out?
Which is actually the largest state in Mexico. Mexico State has 16 million inhabitants. And so it's a very important election. It's also a bellwether election. It's a state that the PRI has never lost. It plays horribly, to be frank. I mean, perhaps the great advantage right now, and I don't know how much longer it's going to last, but the great advantage we have now, and I'm talking by we, I mean those people who really liberals, but liberal in a classic British sense of the word. In other words, people who believe in economic liberty, people who believe in basic liberalism, in the rules in the rule of law, and in democracy. Those of us who have been fighting for that, I think. We now are at a point where there is a consensus in Mexico that that free trade, and particularly the North American free trade, is a good to be defended, and I think that is giving us more leeway than we would normally have. I'm not quite sure how much longer it's going to last, because as you know, these vacuums of power fill very quickly. So if you start seeing these spaces where interest groups, particularly in agriculture, but also in manufacturing, and when they start smelling blood in the water, they're going to want to get their protection. And so we started seeing that with respect to a group of people from the countryside. They took one of the streets here in Mexico in one of the protests, and they started asking for it to be included in the NAFTA renegotiation. And so right now, what we are looking at in terms of agriculture, and with this I'll close, is that Mexico has realized that the voters, white voters in Iowa, are taken much more seriously than brown voters in Texas or California. And so given that reality, we have realized that it is very important to signal to the United States that, you know, that those jobs would be in peril, that we would look for sourcing. We don't want to do it. We love the fact, we love being part of the North American supply chain. We love getting sourcing our products from North America. We believe very profoundly in the region as a whole, and we want to protect it as a region, and we want to make it more competitive. But these are things that we cannot just idly stand by.
So when we look at NAFTA, of course, security was part of the reason for the original creation of the U.S.-Mexico trade deal, where Canada came in to create NAFTA. How do you see security playing out in the role of this negotiations in regards to the fact that Mexico is the wall for North America? You handle a lot of bad people in Mexico that, because you take care of them, they don't end up in Canada. So where does that fit into these negotiations?
Well, security is certainly a linchpin, and as you know, it's very difficult. It's a very difficult issue because, of course, you have American guns being used for organized crime here in Mexico. The money that is being used to corrupt our local police officers is also coming from this narco traffic. And what ends up happening is that narco traffic, with its very powerful economic strength, comes into these localities, into these municipalities. And we have municipal police forces, right? So they come in and they corrupt the entire system. And once that's done, the proposal is lead or silver. In other words, I can either kill you and your family, or I can make you rich. And it's important for me to make you rich because I need to make you an accomplice to me. That's why it's not just a question. I think we spend too much time thinking about corruption as if it were just a question of people actually taking bribes. The lead part of the equation, that is the part of the equation that says that I will riddle you with bullets, is actually is often far more dangerous for the rule of law. And that's what's going on, and it's being financed by drug money, basically. And once they establish those outlets, then they franchise. They franchise into the kidnapping, they franchise into the extortion, and all of that racket.
Thank you, sir.
And so that's something we need to look at very, very clearly. And with respect to continental security, I mean, Sorry, we just gotta. Maybe somebody else will pick up on that point. We got to keep our time frame. I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault. It's sometimes these questions lead into a long answer.
5 minutes, so I can.
And you're over 6, so we're going to have to move over to Mr. Fonseca. You got the floor. Go ahead, sir, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. And I'm glad that within all your presentations, you focus pretty much on the positives of NAFTA, and maybe for too long we've taken NAFTA for granted. Maybe as Canadians, we're quite humble, and we don't like to trumpet, excuse the pun, about all of the great things that have happened with NAFTA in terms of the jobs that have been created and the quality of life that we've been able to provide to our peoples. I would like to ask about within those positive aspects, etc. We've created kind of a robust strategy. We believe that so we've been stateside, speaking to politicians, corporates, different associations, stakeholders, organizations, and kind of deployed a all of government, all parties approach to be able to kind of share our message. It's really one around education and awareness. I'd like to know what the Mexican strategy has been. Has it been similar? Has it been a different type of a strategy? How have you engaged with those influencers and decision makers in the U.S.?
Me or Armando?
I could start with Mr. Gomez, and then we could go to Mr. Ortega.
Okay, so The quick answer is we have engaged very poorly. There are millions of relationships that are going on, and they are very localized. Our border cities, our sister cities, unfortunately, have the tendency to look up and down. We call it the silo mentality. They look north and south, but they don't look east and west. And what that's created is that the narrative of our trade and our border situation has been hijacked by those who would use it for their own political purposes. And so the short answer is we really have been remiss with respect to dealing with all of the stakeholders, and that is something that we need to do. And actually, I would beckon to our Canadian counterparts. I know that Canada does a little bit more. I've been there in Colorado when the Canadian Consulate General does these events in inviting all of these local politicians, and I think that that's excellent. But I think that Canada and Mexico would be much better served to identify those stakeholders and to do a coordinated strategy. We need to take this to heart, and I would invite your learnings and our learnings to get together to do this better.
Mr. Ortega?
I think we have the reference of what Mexico did when we launched the original NAFTA negotiation, and the effort that was crafted by Mexico, especially within the United States and somehow also in Canada, but particularly vigorously in the United States, was outstanding. And then I do share what Agustin Barril-Gomez said, that we took NAFTA for granted and we fall into our comfort zone. Nothing to say that, of course, businessmen have been very active creating all sorts of connections and chain of value. But here, if I understand your question correctly, is a narrative, the one that we lost. And in certain sense, we didn't think it was important to convince anybody about the virtues and good benefits of NAFTA. So this is something that we have to do it again. This is the right time. We could have done it before. We could probably have changed or not the narrative at the political spectrum last year during the electoral process in the U.S., but this is the right time to do it. And just quickly regarding the question on agriculture, once we heard in Mexico about all the attacks against NAFTA, the Mexican government moved quickly to knock the door of Canadian producers on agriculture and other producers, because theoretically you can say that there is the possibility of export substitution, but certainly import substitution, and in particular the agricultural sector, it's a very good candidate to shift from normal U.S. chain to either Canadian or Brazilians or Argentinians. We have worked, the Ministry of Agriculture has worked very closely with the Agriculture Ministry in Canada and with the producers in Canada, so this will happen slowly. And I would say that Americans will at least lose a little bit of that share, of that market share of the Mexican market.
No, the time is pretty well up, and we're going to have to move over to the NDP now. And Mr. Ramsey, you got 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. You've given us certainly a lot to think about on a very important day today, receiving that news this afternoon. Mr. Gomez, you spoke about the ignorance and xenophobia that came out of the U.S. First of all, Canadians don't support that. I think that's widely known that we look to our relationship with the Mexican people as being one of, a shared understanding of culture and the appreciation of it. And, of course, we don't stand by anything that's coming out of the White House in terms of that. But you bring up an important thing around human rights, an important piece that I believe needs to be part of every trade agreement. And I think in the renegotiation of NAFTA, we have an opportunity to strengthen human rights, and Canada can play a key role in that. So I'm wondering if you can speak to us on the importance of Canada playing that role to bring peace to Mexico and to extend our human rights into the other countries.
Wow. Thank you, Ms. Ramsey. First of all, for sharing a vision. I grew up partly in Canada, and these are values that I certainly learned in Canada when I was a little boy. And I appreciate it I appreciate to hear that as often as I can. With respect to human rights, it is a huge issue, and certainly there are very important learnings that we have with respect to Canada. Canada has played a role on a global scale. I think Canada has some excellent learnings that can be shared. In my particular case, when I was working with the Secretary of Public Security in Mexico City, I used the case of community policing with respect to the RCMP. And the RCMP had, at least back then, I'm sure it's even better now, a fantastic community policing model. And that is something very, very specific that we can use. Here in Mexico City, we wanted to use it as an example for a pilot project that eventually did not receive the funding on behalf of our local legislature to do so. But I think that the learnings are there, and I think that that's something that Canada can certainly play a huge role in, and very specifically in the area of community policing and the RCMP.
Thank you. There's been a lot of conversations in Canada around, the fact that Mexico and Canada together have been a counterbalance against the U.S. And an example of that, in a dispute settlement could be around the COOL legislation, the country of origin labeling. So I wonder if you can speak a bit to the extent to which that engagement between Canada and Mexico has helped the two countries to settle disputes like COOL.
Well, first of all, Ms. Ramsey, I think I would start by saying that Canada and Mexico, especially right now, are sort of the adults in the room, right? So, and I don't see it so much as a counterbalance, as much as we are defending something that is very profoundly an American value. And in many ways, right now, it is in our hands to pick up that mantle of leadership while there is none on our neighbor's side. So with respect to our cooperation, this comes back to the fact that we need to understand that this is a trilateral agreement, and that's how we need to see it. We are only strong. We can only be strong with respect to the protectionist and xenophobic forces that are being displayed in the U.S. executive by working together. With respect to the COOL legislation, absolutely. I think it would also behoove us to review and to make sure that our position with respect to the rules of dispute settlement are rock solid in this new, because it was brought up in the letter. Lighthizer does mention that. And so that is something, the letter is a page and a half long. So it's not as if we really have a very strong idea about what's going on, really. But it is mentioned, and it is something that Canada and Mexico need to stand together on.
Okay, clearly, the U.S. is laying out their priorities in a NAFTA renegotiation. In Canada, we've taken an approach of waiting to see what they're going to come with towards us. But in Mexico, I know you've been doing a lot of work. So I wonder if you can speak about what the Mexican main priorities are, and certainly in relation to your relationship with Canada.
Well, funnily enough, our main priorities are they're very much in line with that page and a half that USTR Lighthizer mentioned. We do see an opportunity to modernize the trade agreement, very specifically, phytosanitary measures, the customs procedures. There's an amazing opportunity there. There's digital trade. There's property rights. All of these different things that we were working on in TPP, which everybody who knows anything about trade knows that it was going to be sort of a NAFTA second generation improved. We'd like to pick up on, and I think that those priorities, curiously enough, at least in this chapter of the ongoing saga of what's going on in Washington, at least right now, those priorities are shared I would venture to say, among the three countries.
Thank you, sir. And we're going to move over to Ms. Ludwig. You got the floor.
Great. Thank you. Buenas tardes. Mucho gusto.
There we go.
I just want to. I'm going to start with. Senor Ortega. In terms of the Mexican Chamber of Commerce, you had mentioned 300 Canadian companies that are involved with that. Have you reached out at all to the companies within your chambers and ask them, their reaction or their concerns regarding any disruption in NAFTA. And I'll just put this in a larger context. We've looked significantly at any disruption in NAFTA would mean job losses on all the different borders, because there is a common perception in the United States that with a ripping up of NAFTA, that would actually mean job increases. What is the feeling amongst your companies that you're representing within the Chamber of Commerce in Mexico?
Many thanks. Yes, before crafting this letter, the open letter that we sent to President Peña Nieto on January 17 this year, we made internal consultations with our members. I would not say with all the 300 members, but I would say with the representatives of all the sectors that are part of the chamber. We have manufacturing, we have mining, we have pharmaceutical services, etc. And again, the position is that this is a very valuable asset. And once you have a free trade agreement, what you have is not only access, but is certainty in the access. So the correlation of that is that when we heard months ago or even weeks ago by other members of the U.S. government that their concern would be to dismantle the dispute settlement system of NAFTA, that is comprised of Chapter 11 on the investment side, on Chapter 19, which is dumping and countervailing, and Chapter 20, which is a general one. There is a concern among some of the members, particularly the Canadians who are investing in Mexico, that could be eroded in any manner. So, and certainly any impact related to NAFTA would translate, as you rightly put it, into job losses and in an environment that is uncertain. The other position is that if you go to NAFTA Article 2205, what you have is that hypothetical case where one of the members, in this case the U.S., would be leaving NAFTA. So it is spelled out clearly there that Canada and Mexico would continue to be there. So bottom line is to keep NAFTA going on if we reach that scenario, which I would say is improbable. But the other position of the main members of the chamber is that with or without NAFTA, two things should be done. We should explode under a bilateral basis all the potential of our relationship, for example, in terms of connectivity.
Thank you. Gracias. I'm just going to, un momento. I just want to go into another line of questioning. If we look at trade deficits with the United States, I'll pose this question to Mr. Dade. If we look at the trade deficits to the United States, we often hear from the U.S. side that NAFTA is absolutely disastrous. But when we look at the trade deficit the U.S. has with Canada is $11.2 billion. With Mexico, it's $63 billion, and with China, it's $319 billion. So any change here to NAFTA may create actually more opportunity for a trade deficit with China. So how do we actually separate the impact of NAFTA on, for example, helping our American friends on American jobs versus the impact of China and globalization over the last 25 years?
Two quick points on that. Work out of the National Bureau of Economic Research in the U.S. has shown that the full extent of trade integration, every dollar, and my colleagues can join me in this because we all say this all the time, but every dollar that the U.S. imports of goods or services that the U.S. imports from Canada contains 25 cents of U.S. content. Every dollar that the U.S. imports from Mexico contains 40 cents of U.S. content. Every dollar, number 3 on the list is Malaysia at 8 cents. You have to go all the way down to 4 cents till you hit China, 1 or 2 cents till you hit Russia. So when the U.S. imports something from Canada or Mexico, they're directly U.S. jobs, and we talk about this all the time. On the deficits, we're doing well because the price of oil's down. If the price of oil were back up, our deficit, the U.S. deficit would be a lot higher. But when the Americans talk about deficits, they talk about deficits only in trade and goods. They don't talk about trade and services.
Absolutely.
And we're running a deficit in trade and services with the Americans. And we and the Mexicans need to remind them that all those jobs you like to talk about, the new jobs, the white-collar jobs, the knowledge jobs, you're doing well with this relationship. And let's not forget that. Investment. Investment's another issue where the U.S. does quite well. You look at the investment in Phoenix, tens of billions of dollars from Canada in Phoenix. I was just there a couple weeks ago, and I was floored at the amount of Canadian money that's going down there. So we need to round out the conversation and include those things.
Well, thank you, sir, and I'll remind MPs, just watch your questions at the end of your time, because we want to get everybody in today, and we're doing pretty good. So we finished the first round, and we're going to go on the second round, and we're going to start off with the Liberals, and we got Madame Lapointe. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. It's very appreciated. It's an important day. To have you here with us is very appreciated. Mr. Robertson, you spoke earlier about Mexican visas. They will be canceled they were canceled on December 1st, 2016. Will there be an increase in Mexican tourists, and what is the impact on students in Canada?
Mexican tourism travel to Canada is up about 60 to 80% from what it was. It's still not exactly where it was before the visa was imposed, but there is a significant amount of people now coming to Canada as students, as visitors, and that's all encouraging. But I think we could do more to encourage that. I think the opportunity is there for the reasons outlined by the other speakers.
Est-ce que selon vous, il y aurait une façon?
In your opinion, would there be a way of encouraging that to increase it further? Should work be done in Mexico to bring these people to come visit us in Canada and to have more economic interaction here?
That's exactly what we need to do. The Canada Tourism Agency, as well as the provincial governments, I think, could be going down and pointing out, it's a wonderful time, as the chair pointed out when he made his introductory remarks, to visit Canada. And we know Mexicans do like to travel, and now that the visa is lifted, pointing out you can ski in the winter, and of course how pretty it is in the summer. And through tourism, that will encourage people to say, well, what about taking my kids up here to go to school, either for a year of English or French studies, or to go to university. So I think that there's a huge potential. The fact that we take more students from places like Korea and Malaysia, and not from Mexico, really is surprising. And now that we have Mr. Trump in the United States, that acts as a bit of a push factor for Mexicans to consider Canada.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Dade. J'aurais des questions pour vous.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dade, I have a question for you now. You spoke about agreements. You spoke a great deal about the TPP. You said that we needed to use that as a guide for the renegotiation of NAFTA. But you didn't talk about CETA. Did you look at the agreement with the European Union and what we could apply or draw from that agreement and perhaps apply to the new NAFTA accord? There are some aspects of the CETA agreement that could be used in NAFTA discussions. I haven't done a lot of analysis on this. I focused on TPP. It was a policy of the United States to use TPP to inspire NAFTA. So it's easier to draw comparisons between TPP and NAFTA, but it's a bit more difficult with CETA. I haven't heard anything or any pronouncement from the government of Canada that we could apply CETA in the way that the Americans used TPP for the renewal of NAFTA. And along another line of thinking, should we continue with TPP in 11 countries, given that the United States has clearly said that it would not move forward? Should we continue with it, nevertheless?
This is going to require a much longer response, but we've just carried out a modeling exercise on a TPP 11, a TPP without the U.S. Canada will do second best of all the 11 countries after only Mexico. We will be, in essence, taking market share off the Americans in Asia. market share the Americans will be thrusting our way. Every country will do better of the original 12 except for the U.S., which will suffer losses. If we want to get the Americans back to the multilateral negotiating table, if we want to get them back on the path to common sense, then I would argue that this is the only means that we really have at our disposal to do it. The Americans are shooting themselves in the foot by getting out of the TPP, and there's clear evidence. We have received calls from, as you would expect, Australia, New Zealand, Japan for the modeling exercise. We've also received calls from Secretary Ross's office. We've also received calls from U.S. congressmen and women about the modeling exercise. So this idea of the TPP 11 and the damage it could potentially do to the Americans is also starting to gain traction in Washington. It will help us in the NAFTA negotiations. It gives us something to counter the attempt by the Trump administration to completely rewrite the rules of the game on trade in ways that favor the Americans and disadvantage everyone else.
Thank you, sir. And
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Lapointe.
Gracias.
And that leads well into, now we're going to the Conservatives, and we got Mr. Ritz. Go ahead, sir. You got the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Carlo, thank you for that. We had that little discussion at the beginning of the meeting, and I've been saying the exact thing for a year. Mike Froman, the former ambassador, trade ambassador, has also said that TPP is NAFTA 2.0. If you want to tweak NAFTA, TPP is the vehicle to do it. So you're absolutely right. They didn't just shoot themselves in one foot. They shot both feet by pulling out. And that makes it even more important from a Mexico and Canada linking arms to ratify TPP and move ahead without the Americans. It gives us both some strength dealing with them on NAFTA, as we can point to other trade corridors, Japan especially, the crown jewel. So I'm wondering, is Mexico looking at that seriously at the APEC meetings coming up in Vietnam? We've been pushing the new Liberal government here in Canada to actually ratify TPP. There's nothing in there that should slow us down, and Carla, you just made my point as well. So to the gentleman from Mexico, are you seriously looking at doing that? You've got elections coming up next fall. You're not going to have NAFTA settled by then, but you could certainly have TPP ratified by then.
Armando?
Yes. Yes, if I may, yes, absolutely yes. The position, the formal position of the Mexican government, restated just a couple of weeks ago, is that they will go to that important meeting in Asia, pushing for a TPP 11.
Good.
And I think it's in the best interest of the country. So very much so. But they also have said, the Mexican government has also stated that if for whatever reason TPP 11 would not be feasible, because you recall that originally Japan was reluctant, then we should explore with Canada other avenues like the Alianza del Pacífico. That is a formal position, sure, and one that I agree would help our interest.
But even a TPP 4 or 5, Japan is ratified already, New Zealand is ratified, Australia is working on it, they're very close, and Mexico and Canada added in, you've got the main players involved. So whether it's TPP 11 or TPP 6, it's still in the best interest of Canada and Mexico to buffer the NAFTA talks with that agreement. Mr. Gomez.
Sorry. The thing is, I put myself on mute so that Armando could reply.
I do that during question period.
No, you don't.
Well,
You're asleep.
basically, I've been dealing with our Senate, which is the one that would be in charge of ratifying TPP.
Yes.
It is currently not a priority, even though I completely agree with you, sir. I think that it is something that we should ratify immediately. I think we should take the leadership role. I do know that we do have the institutional capacity in our foreign relations ministry to pick up that gauntlet, and I hope that we can do that.
Mm-hmm. One thing that we found, and Ms. Ramsey touched on this with country of origin labeling. I did a ton of work on that, and what we did was identify like-minded people in the U.S., businesses especially, and Mr. Ortega, you mentioned, too, you were doing that, but we have identified over that course, and now again in NAFTA, 35 states that the number one trading partner is Canada, 13 more were number 2. Has Mexico gone through that exercise as well?
Yes, we have. In fact, for us, the numbers are 23 states. In the U.S. are either number 1 or 2, and And so yes, we have identified those stakeholders. Unfortunately, and I think this is true across the board, we have not done nearly enough. Like not even the efforts have been infinitesimal in my view in terms of actually coordinating those efforts. And these are areas where we could certainly work with the Canadians. It's ridiculous that we haven't done so.
Yeah, I agree. There's no reason that we should not correlate our list to your list and hit them with a double shot saying, here's what you gained from NAFTA, because it's both Canada and Mexico together. Texas comes to mind. California comes to mind, that are both #1 for us, and I'm sure they're right up on the top of your list as well. So we should compare that. If you've got that list, please supply it.
Yeah, I mean, I keep telling my, our members of SRE, which is our foreign affairs and also commerce, I want to see bumper stickers on F-150s in saying this job is a NAFTA job.
Yeah. Well, coupled to that, we've got the midterms coming up in the U.S. And again, all that politics is local. So if we can link arms and say, here's the amount of trade coming out of state X, and here's what your congressmen and senators need to be talking about, and start to then drive that through to Washington from that level. I think it's very important.
Thank you, Mr. Ritz.
Carl?
You have the list.
Good.
We have it not by state, but by metropolitan area in the U.S. Canada, U.S. So we've got to stop talking about the largest trade partner with U.S. states, because I think that's actually fairly meaningless. The largest trade partner means 1% of a state's GDP. But when you get down to the metropolitan area, that's where it means something. We've got the list with Canada, Mexico, who's the largest for New York, for Cincinnati, for New Orleans, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, sir. And a very good comment, because our committee, when we were in Colorado, we met with the mayor of Denver, who's very knowledgeable about the trade and importance of trade between our countries. So all levels are important. We're going to move over to the Liberals now. Mr. Peterson, you got the floor for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, everyone, for joining with us this afternoon. Mr. Dade, I'll start with you. And please do give my regards to Martha Hall Finley. Before she was the Member of Parliament for Willowdale, she actually ran in my riding of Newmarket Aurora in the 2004 election, so we have known her for quite some time. So say hello to her for me when you get the chance, if you don't mind. There was a research paper published by University of Calgary School of Public Policy, which I know you're familiar with. And I'm just going to quote from it. Closer engagement with Mexico will help Canada strengthen its bargaining position with the United States. The two countries can form an effective counterbalance against the United States on matters of joint interest. I think we see that seems to be a consensus with people here. I just want to maybe drill down on that a little bit. What matters of joint interest do you think would closer collaboration between our countries improve this bargaining position vis-a-vis the U.S.? And I'll start with Mr. Dade, but perhaps some of the other members can input as well if they get an opportunity.
First, the overall importance of the relationship, being able to communicate to metropolitan areas and districts in the U.S., the importance. We are working together. So our Consul General in Dallas, for example, and Colin may be able to speak to this as well, working with the Consulate Generals in Mexico. Mexico has 3 Consulate Generals in Texas. We have 1 that has to cover Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. So being able to work with it, but it's idiosyncratic with the Mexicans. Some Mexican consulate generals are very strong in the diplomatic presence. Others are incredibly weak because they're focused only on consular activities. So where there is, we are working together. In terms of the trade agreement, agriculture. Rules of origin within North America is the second area. The Americans and dairy, their primary concern is not supply management, and this is Martha Hall Finley's latest paper. It'll be out in a week. I'm told to shill it for her on supply management. But actually, it's a really damn good piece of work. But it's not their concern about supply management. Their concern is with access to the Mexican dairy market. Right. That's their #1 priority. So if we're worried about dairy, and the Americans are worried about continued access to Mexico, shouldn't we be talking to the Mexicans? And that's just one example.
Exactly. Thank you for that. Mr. Gomez or Mr. Ortega, Mr. Robertson, if you guys have a chance.
Well, I would simply restate that Canada and Mexico working together should defend the dispute settlement mechanism. That is essential. And I think we can also join forces in terms of sanitary and phytosanitary rules. Certainly, I agree, rules of origin, because in the end, again, we have to ensure that we have North America as the most competitive region in the world. And I would hope that the Americans will understand that in the course of negotiations.
Thank you.
Just come back to country of origin labeling is something that we can pick up. Also, procurement, government procurement is something that we also need to work together with the United States on.
Thank you. Mr. Robertson, did you have?
Say trade, but I think that the bigger issue is the whole rules-based liberal international system, the architecture, whether we're talking World Trade Organization, the United Nations. This stuff is all now under a bit of siege, and countries like Canada and Mexico have been the beneficiaries. And if we need to be working together with other like-minded democratic countries to shore up the system. So yes, NAFTA, the North American Economic Accord, is the immediate challenge, but the bigger challenge that I think we face is that of the operating system under which our two countries have done quite well and thrived. That we now have to invest in as well with other like-minded nations.
Okay, thank you. And just briefly, I think I probably have about half a minute left, but just, Mr. Gomez, I mean, if NAFTA doesn't work for whatever reason, TPP doesn't work, is there any other joint initiatives that Canada and Mexico should undertake?
Well, I think the very first thing that we need to be very clear on, both our countries, is that NAFTA, without the United States, will work with Mexico and Canada, period. We need to be very clear that and it's in the treaty, if somebody pulls out, that's fine. The other two maintain that same relationship, but we haven't said it. We haven't come out and said it, and that's something that we really need to do.
Okay, thank you. I think that's my time. Thank you for
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. And we're going to move over to the Conservatives now, and we got Mr. Van Kesteren. You got the floor for 5 minutes.
Sure. Thank you all for a very interesting discussion. There's one thing that nags at the back of my mind, though, and that is the 49% or whatever you think it is, 50% of people that put Donald Trump into office. And, you know, we can debate free trade, and I think everybody in this room would agree that it's a marvelous thing and it makes sense. But there's a whole whack of people that have given up on free trade. And Mr. Gomez, I appreciate I like that idea about this truck is a NAFTA truck, but I'll tell you, you drive that truck in southern Ohio, and that'll get the exact opposite reaction that you want. So, you know, here's the thing, and I appreciate too, Mr. Dade, what you said about Congress coming around. I see that happening, but I just read an article. I think it was this morning. I was trying to find it now. And this guy's calling for, I think he said 3 million people out in the streets if they try to impeach Trump with guns. That's how mad these people are. And you know, we cannot ignore the one thing that brought all this about, and that it was the demise of Midwest American. And I suggest that every one of us should just take a road trip. I've done it. Just drive through Midwest United States and see what these people are so mad about. We got to recognize that we're not talking about Mexico and Canada and some other small country. We're talking about a country that, when I was first elected, had 26% of the world's GDP. It's got an army that spends more money, or an armed forces spends more money than the top 13 countries in the world. That includes Russia and China and all the others. Like, this is huge. And we've talked about some wonderful ideas. And we've talked about some ways that the Americans have not been very fair, and how Donald Trump, and, you know, but I think he's just a phenomenon. I think that it's the force behind him that we have to reckon with. And I just wonder if somebody wants to touch on that and see how we're going to mend that before we come to the table and suggest we open up renegotiation.
We are not going to mend that. The hardcore opposition to NAFTA, those people who have given up hope on liberalism, I don't know that we're going to be able to move all of them. I was in I was in Washington, D.C. for the inauguration, and what struck me most walking around the streets, taking the metro, was how angry the Trump supporters were. I mean, you just won the election. You lost the popular vote and you won. You claimed that the election was going to be rigged. There was no way you could possibly win, and you won. Yet you are still angry. You are still mad.
That's the point. And they're getting mad all over again because they had hoped that this was going to change and that some of those, I mean, we can't argue. We went across Canada and we heard the same argument, not from Trump supporters, but the same argument, people that think free trade is a bad deal. There's a whole host of people, but I'm more worried about the ones in Midwestern United States.
So here's the issue. When you look at Trump supporters, they were also mad about Obamacare. And then they realized slowly that, people were going to lose health coverage. A lot of people didn't care that they were losing health coverage. They still supported Trump. But some people started reconsidering when they saw the impact. Something that was abstract became something concrete. We're not going to get to all of the hardcore opponents of free trade. We're not going to get to the real opponents of NAFTA, but around the edges, people who didn't really think about this or didn't realize the full impact when they voted, those are the folks who we can get to when we show up in their individual congressional district, or we can get plants and show people direct jobs. But you're also seeing this in the states.
It's not working yet. It's not working yet because I'm seeing congressmen that are going back to their constituents and are getting booed right out of their...
But I'm seeing congressmen that are talking about issues on the table with NAFTA and are getting an earful from their constituents as, wait a minute, when we talked about NAFTA, you didn't mention that it was going to be my job that was going, or you didn't mention that it was going to be trade. So you also saw people that elected Trump, who voted for Trump, who were married to illegal immigrants to the U.S. and didn't realize that their husband or their wife was going to be deported. And now they're suddenly waking up, seeing their spouse being deported, and they're suddenly realizing, wait, what I did in anger might not have been that great an idea.
I don't have much time.
Just if I may jump in here, because I'm going to give you Mr. Robinson really wanted to make a comment, so I would hope he make a little comment and wrap her up here.
Maybe it's the same one. Mr. Robertson, yeah.
Yeah, Chair, I was just going to say, look, we've got to do much more in trade adjustment. In Canada, we have a very good safety net. With Medicare, universal care, with job training administered by provinces, it is vastly different from what you have in the United States.
That's right.
So the situations are different, and sometimes we think our system is bad, but in comparison to the U.S., ours is really pretty good. But what we do have to pay attention to, and this next accord will have to take this into account, is trade adjustment. And that will apply probably mostly to the United States because, let's face it, the rising tide lifted a lot of yachts, but not all boats. And we have to take that into account in terms of trade agreements in the future, or we're not going to be doing trade agreements.
Yeah. Am I getting more time? Am I out of time?
No, way over.
Oh, man. Okay.
Even though you're Dutch, you're not going to get that much. So we're going to move over to the NDP. Ms. Ramsey, you got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
I'll actually continue my colleague's thought and say that, this is something we have to mend. Working people are the reason that we're facing this right now because they felt left out. We have to talk about fairness in trade. We have to talk about the way that it impacts workers and communities. If that means a transition into other types of jobs, if that means letting them know how closely tied their jobs are to NAFTA. I drive an F-150. I built F-150 engines in Windsor, Ontario. I love the bumper sticker. I think it's important. We have to tell the story of trade in a positive way. And the way that we do that in this renegotiation is we address the inequalities. We go head on to the inequalities that people have responded to, and we fix them. It's the best way forward for us because we're a trading nation. It's incredibly important, and we have to have trade with other countries. So my question really goes around the labor chapter, and how can we include workers' rights to organize and bargain collectively for those better wages and working conditions that will level the playing field across all of our countries? So my question is, to what extent are workers in Mexico able to organize and bargain collectively for better wages and working conditions?
I was a congressman for a center-left party in the previous legislature. In terms of freedom to organize and to strike, those freedoms are perfectly safeguarded. The thing is that the organized labor movement has been more about filling their own pockets than it has about protecting workers' rights. The only problem is that they are democratic internally. They are democratic institutions. It's that feudalism within our unions is actually backed. It is popularly backed by the workers in general. So that is an issue. Now, the party that I ran under is promoting a dramatic increase in minimum wage in Mexico. I mean, we're talking about a 200% increase, obviously staggered over time and whatnot. I think we need to revisit those issues. And I would just, but I'd like to come back to defending trade as a freedom, because ideologically, I think we've also been remiss. Trade is a freedom. Trade is by nature fair insofar as it is voluntary. And so if we allow people to say, look, I believe that brown people are getting a subsidy. This is in the United States, right? I don't like all these brown people receiving welfare because, I see them as these welfare queens and all of that, all of these horrible images that have been created over the years. And yet they turn around and the first thing that they want is protectionism. And protectionism is nothing but welfare that's paid for by consumers. So these subsidies that people are asking for are of the same tenor as welfare, and we can't let them get away with this idea that protectionism doesn't have costs. It has significant costs, and people will lose their jobs, and people's general welfare will go down insofar as they won't be able to buy the goods that they want.
Thank you, sir. And we're going to wrap up. We have one more MP, and we're welcome, Mr. Longfield. You're the member of Parliament from Guelph. It's good to see you here and joining our very ambitious and I'm not going to use too much more adjectives about our committee, but best committee on the Hill. There we go.
Very good.
Anyway, Mr. Longfield, you have the floor for the last 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks everybody for being here. And it's great for me to be able to hear this part of the conversation coming from the Industry, Science and Technology Committee that I sit on, and I also sit on the Standing Committee for Agriculture. So trade is overlapping in both those areas. And I wanted to start with Mr. Ortega. I'm also past president of the Guelph Chamber of Commerce and board member of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. So the chamber network is something I hold near and dear. Worker mobility is an issue that the Canadian Chamber has focused on our side of the border as well. And our mobility between Canada and Mexico is something that we're trying to improve. Part of our bilateral has to look at labor mobility. Would you be able to make a brief comment on that?
Well, this is certainly an area where NAFTA could really make an enormous change. Between Mexico and Canada, we have this almost 40 years old temporary working program for our people who work in your agricultural sector. But I think right now the country, Mexico, is fit to provide under a more formal framework, NAFTA or another one, a bilateral supply of skilled workers, our professionals, doctors, etc.
Yep.
We should explore it under NAFTA. We should explore it bilaterally. There is no impediment whatsoever.
Thank you. And I think CETA is an example of a progressive trade deal that we've just signed that could be used as an example. And with little time, I want to look over to Mr. Dade and also Mr. Ortega, and not to leave out Mr. Gomez or Mr. Robertson, but looking at the Canadian companies that are operating in Mexico, or Mexico companies in Canada, like Dina and Motor Coach in Winnipeg. Looking at Linamar in Guelph has offices in Mexico for auto parts supplying. Grupo Bimbo, Canada Bread was mentioned. How do we pull those companies together to look at the advantages of the bilateral agreements and make sure that they understand that the bilateral agreements under Article 205 would still be in place? Where are we at with those conversations?
That would be a question, I think, for the Minister Champagne to see what sort of outreach has been done. I would just note that on Canadian companies in Mexico, the examples you mentioned are far too few. We have underperformed in the Mexican market.
Yep.
We are fourth in the Mexican market in terms of softwood lumber.
Right.
2 years ago, we went to the Alberta Forestry Association and said, softwood lumber is coming back again. you're looking at Asia, why are you number 4 in Mexico after Chile and Brazil?
Right.
The response was a shrug of shoulders. Canadian businesses haven't taken up the challenge or the opportunities in Mexico. It's not the fault of this government. It's not the fault of the previous government. It's on the Canadian private sector who's had too easy a time in the United States.
Well, and sometimes now an opportunity comes out because of changes. We have 7% of our of Mexico's agriculture imports coming from Canada in agri-food and seafood, and $25 billion market we're only getting $1.7 billion of. So we need to look at what can we do together and how can we approach the outside world together off the North American shores. Any other comments around the table on that? Because I think this committee could really pick up on that piece.
No. I would just back what Carlo was saying. I think we've been remiss with respect to the opportunities that we share, and I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're not establishing those links properly. I'm very happy to hear that that a committee group is going to come down to Mexico. It's going to be wonderful to have you down here, and I think that's a great first step.
And the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce, I know, has done a lot of international work, and they've done it all over the world, but to focus on Canada and Mexico, I think just to throw it over to the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce and get the chamber network behind it on both sides of the border.
Manitoba is, I think, the leader in Canada in terms of engagement.
Yep.
What Centerport has done in terms of taking advantage of things that the previous government put on the table with the financing initiative, the work that they're doing with reaching out to Mexican suppliers to use Winnipeg as a basis for distribution in North America, I think that sets the example for the rest of Canada.
And then we have some momentum going into talks with the states. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Longfield, and good comments, good questions. Great presentations, gentlemen, today, and very timely for us. And thank you for spending your precious time. And we are going to work on it, getting down to see you folks down in Mexico, and we will be forwarding our final report to you in the fall. We'll get it to all of you to see. And if you have any more comments on as we go through this journey, we don't mind receiving them on the way through, because I'm sure there's all kinds of turns are going to be happening for us. So thank you again for coming. Folks, we're just going to suspend for 2 minutes, and then we're going to go into future business.